Okay, so it's been adopted. Thank you. Now listen, hey, I remind you, there was a point added to the agenda, Mr. Snowden's statements. Okay, so we still have an hour to go. We still have an hour to go for this discussion. Please, 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 please. LIBE members, please stay in the room. Please stay in the room because there was a joint request by a number of groups that's been agreed to add up to the agenda this evening. Remind you, GUE, Greens, ALDE and S&D asked for this additional point in the agenda. Okay? So please, let me remind you. Please, 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 please. Those in the room remain in silence, please. Please, 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 please. Please, if I may have your attention. I mean, time is of the essence here. Time is of the essence. So if you make noise, you'd only make it harder. Let's go right to the point, okay? Remind you. Meeting, LIBE Committee, February the 24th. We approved the recommendations by a majority of coordinators to send Mr. Snowden's lawyers a series of questions. That was a decision established by the political groups in December. We have received these answers to the questions. We have changed the agenda to include a discussion on these statements by Mr. Snowden through his lawyers for an exchange of views. I will be given the floor to our rapporteur, Mr. Moraes, and then shadows. If some other members will to contribute, they will have a chance. Okay, Mr. Moraes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a very short and ad hoc discussion which I think the political groups requested. First of all, to say that it's very self-explanatory what has happened, that Mr. Snowden has given his evidence in writing, and I just want to make a few introductory remarks and particularly leave the floor open for those colleagues who particularly wanted to give a gloss or to give a commentary on what they feel about those remarks. So let me just say one or two things. First of all, as rapporteur, I maintained a neutrality in terms of wanting his evidence to come forth, because my feeling was that we would not have had an inquiry had it not been for Mr. Snowden's allegations and for the information that he gave us. And I think it's very important that before we go to the plenary vote on Wednesday, that we had the answers to his questions. And also that it was a balanced set of questions from all colleagues. As far as my political group is concerned, we, I think, received a very satisfactory answer. I think it's also the case that we would have preferred an interactive session. Unfortunately, we didn't get that, but I think I want to thank the Secretariat and everyone who talked to the interlocutors to get this evidence. It's better that we had it before the plenary than not have it at all. I also want to thank Mr. Snowden himself and put that on record for giving us the evidence. And I want to ensure that that's on record. It's been said that we've not thanked him, and I want to thank him for giving evidence to the inquiry, and I want to thank him as rapporteur. The second thing is I think that the answers he's given have been clear, open and honest. And I don't want to make a commentary on each of the answers he's given because I think each political group has asked a question and have got the answers they wanted to get. As far as the S&D group is concerned, the question that I asked he has given a comprehensive answer to that question. So I don't want to give any more remarks apart from that introductory remark. I might want to come back at the end once I've heard a discussion from other colleagues.
It'll be to you, Mrs. Inveld. Mr. Voss.
Danke sehr. Ich möchte
Thank you very much. I'd also like to offer thanks for the answers to the questions, and I think it's good that before the vote we can take note of them. Although I have to say, I'm not sure we've got such extra knowledge that we need to amend the report from the rapporteur, because I think there's not that much new on top of what was initially announced. If you're looking for new knowledge, then you could look at cooperation between member states or at the structure relating to whistleblowers. It's interesting to hear his perspective on that. But at the end of the day, I don't see so much new material that it would influence the report, because I think we already anticipated the material that he's describing. So from that point of view, I'm very happy with the answers.
To you, Mrs. Sindel.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Very briefly, because I have to speak in plenary in a few minutes. It was understood from the start that Snowden wouldn't come with any new revelations. I think that's part of the deal. But I found the answers revealing in that they show how the United States, in this case, but I wouldn't be surprised if the same applies to a country like Russia, is putting pressure on the EU member states, and they accept the pressure in order to change their laws and basically legitimize the mass surveillance. This morning I read in the media that apparently the NSA is now talking to its subcontractors, and they're trying to find ways to monitor their staff, because they're considered the insider threat. I mean, instead of, because one of the things that's becoming clear from Snowden's replies is that it is very difficult for anybody to report wrongdoing in a proper procedure internally. There are no proper procedures, so he was forced to go public. Now, if organizations like the NSA or other secret services don't like whistleblowers, they have to make sure that there are proper internal procedures in place to report wrongdoing. So instead, what do? They say we're going to keep a closer eye on our staff, because they're considered the insider threat. So what do we get? You know, a body of, let's say, civil servants and agents who are mute and supposed to have no views, not report wrongdoing. I mean, is that the kind of government services that we want? I find that scary, frankly. And I think this is, for me, this is one of the most important conclusions from his replies, that we need to look very, very carefully at the possibilities for staff to report wrongdoings. Now I apologize, I have to leave for plenary.
Thank you, Mrs. Sindveld. Jetzt Herr Albrecht für die Grünen. Sie haben das Wort.
Mr. Albrecht for the Greens.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, let me say that I'm very happy that we now, at least short before voting on our final report, we have the opportunity to look into the answers by Edward Snowden and discuss them. And secondly, I think it's very important to say, with regard to his answers, that it's proving once more that Edward Snowden is a whistleblower. Edward Snowden is a whistleblower, and that's a very important message which we have to also send as European Parliament, because he is not a criminal. As Sophie in 't Veld just pointed out, he has reported wrongdoing of intelligence services, not only the NSA but also European intelligence services, to the public, which would have been never reported if he would have not done this. And I think that we have to acknowledge that. As European Parliament, it's our duty to acknowledge that and to stand in favor of giving him the protection he needs as a whistleblower and as the central witness in this scandal, which we all have talked about and which we all have acknowledged the value in it for drawing consequences. And there have to be consequences. If you look into the answers, again, of course we all know he was not able to say more than he already reported, or at least what is out there reported by journalists, but now we have it also written down by the primary source of who has brought up these documents, once again, that obviously intelligence services have stepped across borders. And we're talking not only about a political debate here, it's about a legal assessment. Intelligence services crossing the borders of what is proportionate, of what is actually legally in their consequences, and I think that we have to get into the details of it, and that we have to look also into the possibilities of getting Edward Snowden also as a witness to a European investigation in front of a court, or a parliamentary investigation which is also able to be called a real investigation and not only a talk, which is great that we had it, but I think there's something more in here which needs to be scrutinized also in a real investigation. And then we have to talk about how to better control intelligence services and their work. Obviously, intelligence services on both sides of the Atlantic, and I mean we are on the forefront of what rule of law based democracies are out of control. And that's again written down by Edward Snowden directly, who has an insight into what the intelligence services are doing together. He lines out different examples of intelligence services of the European Union member states and the NSA working together on programs which are not appropriate with regard to the legality of these measures. They are disproportionate, and this is even acknowledged already by the US government. I mean, we should not be behind the US government in acknowledging that something was going wrong. We should be at the forefront naming it. And that is something which I think is very important also with regard to our Wednesday's vote on the final report of this inquiry. So I think that these questions, again, with regard to his status as a whistleblower, but also with regard to the facts on the ground, was very important. These answers were very important, and I think that we need to do our best as European Parliaments to bring these facts to the awareness of the national parliaments and the national governments in the European Union. Because, let me close with that, only showing with the finger to the NSA and to the USA is really wrong in this case. It's not appropriate. When we talk about drawing consequences out of this scandal, we have to look into our own intelligence services and their activity. And obviously, and that's also what I really was hearing from the member states parliamentarians we had in our hearings, I don't feel that our own intelligence services are under control at the moment. If you look into the notion of national security, by the way, that's also mentioned by Edward Snowden again, it's broadened again and again by our own national intelligence services for years now. By the way, since the Echelon inquiry here in the Parliament already brought that on the table in 2001 in its report, 160 pages, that's on the table. National security has been broadened massively. I mean, we should debate about the fact or the question if spying on other EU member states, their institutions, their people and their companies is in the notion of national security of an EU member state. Shouldn't we debate that? Shouldn't we put that into our report and bring that to the awareness of national parliaments, which are obviously not looking at this at the moment? I think yes, and therefore I really recommend to strengthen our language in our final report with regard to these questions. But at the end, also if we just go voting it in the way we have voted in our committee, please reconsider our amendment with regard to the status of Edward Snowden as a whistleblower and as a witness, and just stating that he's not a criminal, but somebody who brought this all to public awareness. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That'll be Mr. Kirkhope representing the ECR. If no other representative, I don't see him in the room anymore. So no ECR representative. Then we will be moving to Frau Ernst, Ihre Wert.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you. Well, first of all, our group would also like to address a great thanks to Edward Snowden. He's given us answers. Of course, we would much have preferred a direct conversation with him, at least via video link. But I think this shows one of the ironies of history. Those who can most enlighten us cannot come to join us because it's a question of courage, as he says in his own answers, to obtain asylum. I think we must note that nothing really has changed. If you look at the situation as a whole, despite all the revelations and all the information that we've got, nothing has changed, nothing has been clarified, no conclusions have been drawn either by the EU or any other member state. Nothing has happened, it's all going exactly as it was going on before. The intelligence services continue to snoop, there's ongoing espionage without limits, and that's the astonishing thing. I have to say one of the decisive questions for me is what purpose is served in our current society of having secret diplomacy? What's the point of the secret diplomacy? I think we need to clearly define it. And what is national security? I think it's become this knockout argument and it is used to cover up all sorts of things that are kept out of the public eye. So it's a big problem. What is meant to be covered by secret diplomacy and what not? I think that's the question we have to ask, and it's not been asked anywhere, including in our report. If I read that Edward Snowden writes about one of the highest goals of the NSA being economic surveillance, then you have to say, what does that have to do with a democratic society? And the complete failure to scrutinize and regulate the secret services as well. He writes in one of his answers that you can only have democratic checks and balances if performed by the opposition rather than the government majority. So I think we really need to give some fundamental reconsideration to these issues, and if governments and parliaments stay silent in the member states when all this is going on, then I believe we have to ask to what extent we still genuinely have sustainable democracy in Europe anymore, and that's something I'm very unwilling really to countenance. And it's been a long time now and member states haven't begun their investigations, and this applies to all member states. They need to look at to what extent and how tangibly their intelligence services have been involved. And also at EU level, I'm just waiting for the Commission to implement work on the basis of what's in the revelations from Edward Snowden rather than waiting for the next crisis. It's something that simply bespeaks the need for lessons to be learned, and as Snowden has put it, mass surveillance threatens our way of life. I think it couldn't be better said.
Jetzt, wir haben noch etwas Zeit für...
Now we have a little time for other members. Mr. Weidenhauser. Thank you, Chairman. I think it was very important for us to have an opportunity to discuss this issue today. There was a lot of discussion about whether this should happen, should we have had such an event. I think what we are hearing from Edward Snowden is very important, and of course we already knew a great deal, but let's turn this around. Without him we wouldn't have had this committee, we wouldn't have had the 100 or other witnesses questioned to compile the report. And I think he sets out very impressively what we've done, and impressively sets out the motives why he didn't want to do business or betray his country but become a whistleblower. He had specific motivation to do that, to do with the basic democratic polity of his country, which he wanted to put foremost. I think that's an important piece of information from this roundup of questions. I'm happy that therefore we've got this meeting tonight. Of course it would be different if we'd have had the opportunity to put questions to him directly. Of course it's incumbent on us to learn some lessons from this. We shouldn't depart in self-satisfaction saying we were the only ones holding up the lofty banner of truth, to say that the European Parliament was the only one that really seriously got to grips with the issue. I would say we've got a lot of work on our plates for the next Parliament, and I think that we're going to have to build on these things. He's demonstrated to us unambiguously that in the most serious way member states have done things that we are going to have to look at. In the individual member states, they'll have to look at what their governments have done. There's so much open in here, and I would say the fact that there's such a scale of economic espionage is something that we are going to have to take a long, hard look at, because this comes down to the fundamentals. We hope to have a system of competition where in a free market economy different countries could compete, and if one side has all the information and the other has no intelligence, then you can't really talk about competition anymore. This is projected to a preposterous level, and I think it's going to prompt some serious thought from us. And lastly, Snowden himself said he applied to several member states for asylum. I think we're going to have a look at this seriously. We need to look at where that should happen, because he's helped us come on quite a lot. Mrs. Ludford.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just a few short comments. I'm also very grateful for the replies from Edward Snowden. In his introductory statement, he makes remarks which I think are highly pertinent today. I haven't seen the latest during the day about the tragic Malaysian lost plane, but the point he makes about the diversion of resources from mass surveillance, I think, is a highly pertinent one, and he challenges, indeed, he points out that the White House reviews have completely undermined the assertions that terrorist attacks have been stopped by mass surveillance. And my colleague Sophie in 't Veld has consistently made this point, as I have for a long time, that blanket data collection and surveillance it often diverts attention and resources from routine policing and law enforcement. And apparently Interpol has said that there were 1 billion flights last year on which people's passports were not checked. I confess I was staggered by that. I had no idea the extent of that. But we have been saying for years in this committee about aviation security that it should be first things first, actually checking who is getting on the flights. And we all know from the 9/11 Commission and so on, all the information that was there, but standard investigative policing was not followed. Leads were not followed up. Data based on suspicion was not used. And so all this bulk collection, suspicionless data that's collected means that the eye's taken off the ball, and I think this is a point, as I say, which appears to be borne out today. And I am very glad that The Guardian printed the Snowden allegations. I think they did so, and my own party confirmed our view and our appreciation. This weekend we had a party conference in the UK, and we applauded The Guardian for having it printed them in a very responsible way, which cannot be the subject of criticism but undermining intelligence. And I'm also pleased to say that my party passed a motion on a digital bill of rights calling for an end to bulk collection of data without suspicion, calling for a review, and my party leader Nick Clegg, who is the Deputy Prime Minister in the UK, has set up an independent inquiry in cooperation with the Royal United Services Institute, which, as it sounds, is a very sort of, establishment organisation. It's not what you'd call the usual suspects in terms of sort of lefty civil libertarians. So that is an independent review set up by my party leader as Deputy Prime Minister. Unfortunately, failed to persuade the Conservatives and the Conservative Prime Minister to establish a government review. So this is a review being sponsored by the junior party in the UK coalition. But we believe that the legal framework and the oversight are seriously inadequate, and that we must stop the bulk collection of data. So I'm grateful for these replies. I haven't, confess, read every word. The only thing, I suppose, that I do still have a slight question is he answers the questions about the channels open to him. I would have liked a discussion of whether he had a chance to go to a member of Congress or a senator, because I'm not clear that that was closed or would not have been an opportunity. But maybe that answer will come another time.
There are still a couple of words running out of time, so I'll appreciate if you help us out. Okay, with the timing. Mrs. Argentini, now your turn.
Thank you very much, Chair. I find the answers by Edward Snowden very helpful in our thoughts on this file, and where we have been spending a lot of time listening to specialists, but also a lot of time trying to find the right language to balance out a report. He puts back in our thoughts the questions that are there. For instance, secret services in the US and in Europe, are they always looking for terrorists, or am I, as not a central politician, not a central-based politician, am I outrageous in my opinion, and therefore should you look at me? The examples that we've already read, but that he brings back to mind about politicians that were not extremists, that were not terrorists, but that could be tried to have their position undermined by digging up information on their private life. Are we still sure that this is helpful in securing our democracies, and is this still leading to a more secure life? I don't think so. The example that he puts forward my own country as a country that is targeted by the NSA to change the laws to let blanket mass surveillance be happening. I find these questions very crucial, and to me they're very useful to clarify where we're going with all of us. And for the Greens, the vote tomorrow, the vote on Wednesday, the debate tomorrow and the vote on Wednesday is also a vote that shows that this Parliament is very worried. And for us it would also be very valuable if our colleagues in the SD and the Liberals would vote with us on the amendment that we put forward to give Edward Snowden the status of a whistleblower and the possibility to ask for asylum in the European Union, because it is not enough just to put it on paper, as we say in the Netherlands. Paper has a lot of patience, but this whistleblower needs protection, and he's clear on that when he gives us the answer, that he doesn't know for how long he will be protected in Russia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Argentini. Now your turn, Mr. Engstrom, before getting back to our rapporteur, Mr. Moraes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I too would like to extend my thanks to Mr. Snowden. First of all, for the big revelation. I mean, the fact that he's made public documents that show that our democratic society is under attack from certain, spying organizations. That's one thing. And I would also like to thank him specifically for providing very, very clear answers. Now, it is true that for those of us, those of us here and everywhere else who have been following these revelations, many of the things are known already, but there was one thing that was fairly new to me, that the NSA has a foreign affairs division, a specific division that works, as my colleague Mrs. Argentini was saying, on changing laws in various EU member states. Ms. Snowden highlights two countries. One is the Netherlands and the other one is Sweden. In Sweden in 2008 we got a new law for the FRA, which is the Swedish spying organization. Ms. Snowden mentions it on page 4 in the report. We got a new law in Sweden giving our spying service extended rights. It was quite controversial at the time. And at that time in Sweden, it was not obvious to us on the barricades, us who were fighting against that law, why our Prime Minister was so incredibly set on getting this particular law through. So with that background, I think reading about the NSA having a foreign affairs division that works on subverting laws in member states is a good revelation. And in this context, I would like to ask, I mean, there's obviously nobody here to answer since Mr. Snowden is not here, but I would like to ask, on the data protection package, we're having problems getting what we want from Council. Are we sure that the same thing is not happening there, that the NSA is perhaps talking to various key governments, making sure that they are blocking the data protection package?
Very good point, Mr. Engstrom. Thank you for that. Now back to you as rapporteur, Mr. Moraes, to conclude the discussion.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's really interesting to hear. I mean, I was a bit sceptical about how much we would gain from having this debate on Strasburg Monday in committee with very few of us here. But I'm very convinced that it was the right thing to do because, as Mr. Albrecht had said in one of the inquiry meetings on this, had we adequately acknowledged that we would not have had an inquiry, and I think Mr. Weidenholzer also made this point, had Mr. Snowden not made these revelations, we would not be here. And I think we've adequately said today that we thank him for giving us concise, comprehensive answers. He didn't overdo it. He just gave us adequate information that we needed, and he answered our questions. He also answered questions that were searching, possibly even hostile, and he answered them, I think, with dignity and openness, which I want to put on record we are very grateful for. I don't want to gloss or interpret what everyone has said, but I do want to pick up one point that Mrs. Ludford made. What Edward Snowden has told us is that, first of all, as Mr. Albrecht said, he is a whistleblower. And in the report on Wednesday, as we have said all along, we're not making a value judgment on what he's done. He has been a whistleblower, and our report is not a mild report. It is a digital Bill of Rights for Europe. Mrs. Ludford has talked about what is happening domestically, and we should be proud in this room, because it includes all the shadows and members who have attended 6 months of hearings, that when we vote on Wednesday, if we do it in a unified way, we are in some way paying tribute to the nature of the revelations that have been made. I think it's a very comprehensive report, and I think we should vote in that way, in a very unified way and with some pride in what we have achieved over those 6 months. This is not a flimsy report, it's a very substantial report. It is a digital Bill of Rights, and I hope that we can do that in the way that Mr. Snowden has given his evidence, in a very concise, open and honest way. So I look forward to the vote on Wednesday, and I'm glad we had this exchange of views in the very temperate way that we've had this evening.
We thank you too. We thank you too, Mr. Moraes. Yes, we did the right thing, despite the difficulties and the stress of the timing, despite we are compelled by the immediate vote we're going to have on the final report. We did the right thing, including this discussion in the final track, and that'll be the end of it, of this session of this LIBE committee, up until we resume our work 19th and 20th February in Brussels, the next meeting taking place in Brussels next week. Thank you all. Thank you.